This is going to be going over why equipment score is a very misleading metric and generally not good to use for evaluating gear. Typically, people will use equipment score to just look at a piece of gear and see how high it rolled, but equipment score doesn't really tell you the full story behind why a piece is or isn't good. I've also seen people say that you should use the simple selection and just toss out any piece of gear below 26 starting equipment score. I would say this is horrible advice if you actually care about getting gear. If you just want to be lazy, you don't feel like thinking about your gearing, and you just want to get rid of gear, then sure, 24, 26, go for it. But if you actually care about getting good gear, you should never use simple selection. Even putting it as low as 24 would make it borderline impossible for you to get certain pieces of gear that are still very valuable to have for any account. So let's talk about what equipment score actually is first. Equipment score is basically just showing you in the possible roll ranges for each substat how high did this roll. The general idea is that substats will be normalized, so one crit chance roll at max is on an 88 or an 85 piece of gear, which this is 88, but on an 85 piece of gear it would be 5 reforged, then you hit 6, and then one attack percent max roll would be 8 on an 85 piece of gear. So then it multiplies crit chance by 1.6 so that both will be worth 8. This calculation method by itself is already a bit flawed, but I'll save that for later because there's some much more important things to talk about first. First, let's look at this Abyss Ring. We have 21% HP, which is 21 equipment score, 5 speed is 10, 17 crit chance is about 27, and then 18 effectiveness is 18. Combine all of that together and you get 76, plus 26 from the main stat, because equipment score also factors in the main stat, which is another issue, and then we end up with 102. 102 is a pretty big number, though the number by itself is pretty meaningless. Just for reference, if we ignore the fact that because this was an Abyss Ring, the substats were set, if we ignored the substats were set, mid-roll on every single roll, the 4 base rolls plus the 5 rolls from enhancing it, if we hit mid-roll on everything, it would have been 86 equipment score, so we're 16 above the average. Rather than looking at the number or roll ranges, though, you typically care more about whether the piece actually has usage for you, though that's a topic for later. So this number of 102 tells you absolutely nothing about stuff like substat, main stat, and set synergy. Like for this ring, we have attack percent main with HP, speed, and crit chance on lifesteal set. This screams that it's attack scaling bruiser gear, which means that this effectiveness is completely out of place. If this was a speed set ring, then you could say attack, HP, speed, and effectiveness could be an attack scaling damage dealer, or just a burn unit, something like that. But it's on lifesteal, so this has to straight up be for a bruiser. And then that also means that this effectiveness will be useless. So then we have 18% effectiveness here, which is pretty much completely worthless. Now we could try to modify this effectiveness, but because it's an 88 gear, it mods a little bit lower. So we'd get at most 11. This is a drop of 7%, which means that this equipment score at best, in terms of being an actual usable piece of gear, is more like 95 rather than 102, which 95 is still pretty good, but it's definitely a lot lower than what it looks like at first glance. So let's take a look at another piece of gear, if I can find it. Here somewhere, it's a destruction necklace. Okay, this one here. This necklace is 95 equipment score on destruction set, which is pretty good, but this effectiveness roll is again completely useless. I have this on my Litica, but she's built full damage. I don't care about the effectiveness. So this is basically 9% of wasted stats, which means that this is more like 86 equipment score instead. I still use this necklace though, it's just lower than what the 95 indicates. Even being 86 equipment score, it's still in my pool of usable DPS necklaces on destruction set, which is part of what I was talking about earlier, where you don't care what the number is. If it's usable, then it's usable. So here, I already modded attack percent on, which means that I can't mod this effectiveness off anymore, and that also means that this deadline is going to be here forever. There's no way for me to fix it. But even if I could mod it, I wouldn't necessarily be gaining 9% equipment score, and that reason we'll be getting into in the next section. So let's say that you know how to evaluate gear, and you'll be able to tell whether or not the synergy is good. Even in this case, equipment score still isn't perfect for telling how well rolled a piece of gear is. This is due to the usage of flat stats on gear. It's typically said that flat stats are really bad and you want to avoid them, but that's only partially true. There's some instances where you actually want flat stats on your gear. Let's start off with the easier to understand part of this, having flat stats as the fourth line on our piece of gear. This necklace here is an example of a really good DPS gear. Torrent set with crit damage main, attack percent, speed, and crit chance substats, as well as defense percent. And then all of our rolls went into attack percent and speed, so we managed to dodge the defense, which means that the set, main stat, and the substats all synergize for a perfect DPS gear. Also, the equipment score is 105, which at a glance tells us that this is pretty high roll. If we actually look at the roll ranges, attack percent is 2% off max, defense is 1%, crit chance is also 1% off of max, and speed is basically maxed. We're going to pretend that 5 speed doesn't exist because the odds of that are so low. So pretty much everything at this gear is telling us that it's very good for a DPS unit, but this defense percent is still a little bit out of place. So what are we going to do about it? We will be putting this on a pure damage unit, so we don't really care about the bulk. If we're optimizing this for damage, how do we increase our damage? The best way to do that is to actually just change this to flat attack, because flat attack is more damage and no other substat would give us any sort of meaningful damage increase. So I'm just going to change this now. And we low rolled, but it's fine. It's chasing higher on the flat rolls isn't really worth it. And you can see our equipment score actually dropped. It went from 105 to 102, but in terms of being a damage piece, this piece of gear is actually better than it was before. So this situation where improving the piece decreases the equipment score is one of the big reasons why equipment score is very unreliable for telling you how good a piece of gear is. For any pure DPS right side, meaning ring, necklace, or boot, the maximum possible equipment score is going to be about 4 lower than a bruiser piece, which wouldn't use any flats in its substats. Like here, bruiser gear, you'll have defense, HP, sometimes attack, speed, crit chance, and crit damage. No flats in an optimal bruiser gear, but an optimal DPS gear is going to have flat stats involved. It's even worse when it comes to tank gear, because some tank pieces want you to have not just 1 but 2 flat stats on it. This boot on the right here is one of the best pieces of gear on my account. But let's see how far down we even have to scroll to get here. It's pretty far down. The necklace is over here. So it's all the way down here. But like I said, this is one of the best pieces of gear on my account. If we look at this, it's defense percent, flat HP, and HP percent. All of the rolls went into defense percent and HP percent, plus they rolled pretty high. The equipment score isn't anything crazy though. It's 96, which 96 is good, but at a glance, this doesn't seem like an insane piece of gear. We do have to consider though that we have 2 flat stats here and they are optimal because this piece of gear is going on a unit that doesn't care about effectiveness and it doesn't care about FRES. But if we had, I don't have an F gem, but F rolls the same as FRES, it's going to be 9% max. If we had effectiveness here and FRES here, this would be 9% plus 9%, 18% total. While these 2 flat stats are worth only 11 combined. So we are losing out on 7 equipment score here. And the way I look at it is, this is effectively equivalent to 103 equipment score in terms of roll quality, because all of our rolls went into the other 2 stats, and these 2 were just going to be here anyways. They tank our equipment score, but it doesn't mean that the piece isn't good, even though that this is only 96. This is definitely much higher value than just a 96 equipment score piece of gear. So, in general, for any piece that wants both flat HP and flat defense, the max equipment score is going to be about 7 or 6 lower than a piece of gear that doesn't use any flats. So again, like the DPS version, it doesn't really indicate how good a piece of gear is. There's also some pieces of gear that aren't going to use both flat stats, they're only going to use 1. Don't know if I have any examples here immediately. Something like this, I guess. We're losing out on roughly 4 equipment score from this. So it's only 96 again, but I actually, technically for this piece, if I'm using this on Bellion, I wouldn't want this effectiveness here either. But it's here, it is what it is. But so, anyways, that's it for using flat stats as your fourth line. And so far, we've only been talking about using flat stats as an unrolled line, but let's get into the more complicated part, when it's acceptable to roll into your flat stats. The first is what I call, it is really, really hard to only hit 2 lines on a piece of gear. This is more related to what I was talking about earlier, about looking at whether or not a piece of gear actually has usage for you rather than the score. On right side gear, one of our optimal substats is locked into the main stat slot. Like on this boot, we can't roll speed because speed is the main stat, and on this ring, we can't roll HP percent because HP percent is a main stat. This means we have one less substat for us to hit. For pieces like this, where we have exactly 2 lines we want to hit, the odds of you dodging both of these flats is 3.125%. For something like this, where let's ignore the fact that I actually modded this defense on, if we assume that this started out with effectiveness, speed, flat HP, and defense percent, the odds of you dodging the flat HP here on a 3-line gear is 23.7%. So looking at this boot again, the odds of you actually dodging these flat stats is so absurdly low. Odds are you're going to be hitting these flat stats when rolling gear like this. And if you try to only use pieces that dodge flats, then you're just never going to have gear. You're never going to have gear for this archetype, which is units that want no F res, they only want defense and HP. So like if I go to here, speed set, we can do speed main with flat HP and flat defense. You can see here, I have a bunch of other boots. Like this is my Elia boots. This has 1 roll into the flat HP. This has 1 roll into... This actually has no rolls in the HP or defense. It's just much lower score. And then this has 1 roll into HP, 1 roll into defense, and it is also just much lower score. So this is the insane boot. These two are like okay. They're still very good, I would say. Like we can just do the mental +7 or just +6. Let's just do like +6. So this is 94. This is 93. Like that is still very good for a right side piece of gear. But then this one, you do like a +6. It's 84. That's pretty low. But it doesn't matter, right? Because I have usage for it. This was one of the first boots I got for this archetype of gear. And I have 3 upgrades to it now, but I still have usage for this one. So there's no reason for me to toss it out. It's either I have this boot or I have no boot at all. It's not like I'm actively chasing low-rolled pieces, but because I have used to this, or for this, it's still worth keeping around, and that is one of the things, just even if your score looks low, especially on pieces of gear where it's very, very hard to get good versions of it, 3.125% to even dodge these substats, not mentioning rolling high, because this also dodged both. I actually modded the flat on here, but this also dodged both lines, and it rolled much lower. So you can see that it's not easy to get gear like this. So this is Light's Boss Arunka from his How to Build MO Arunka video, which I'll leave a link to in the description for anybody who wants to watch it. And let's use Boss Arunka as an example of a unit that typically ends up with flat stats. This unit wants 3 stats total: defense, HP, and FRes. So we've got HP percent, defense percent, FRes, flat HP, and flat defense as our desired substats. In an ideal set of Boss Arunka gear, you're going to have flat HP on your sword, flat defense on your helm, flat HP on your chest, and then both flat HP and flat defense on all 3 right side pieces. If you were looking at gear for this unit and you're trying to use a standard of, let's just say, 95 equipment score left side and 90 equipment score right side, you'd effectively be chasing 98 equipment score left side and 96 equipment score right side in terms of roll quality, which is going to make it much, much harder for you to actually get gear. So looking at his gear here, this ring is the one that stands out. It's 79 equipment score, which looks really low, but that doesn't really matter because this ring has the stats that we need. His final stat line of 3.1k defense, 25k HP, and almost 100 FRes is good enough. Like, this is good. It doesn't matter that the equipment score on the ring is low because it gets us to the final stat line that we need, and it looks fine. Also, looking at his other right sides, we have speed here, which the speed isn't really necessary. This is kind of just not needed. Ideally, this would be flat HP, but having the speed here. Like for other units, might use the speed, but for Boss Arunka specifically, the speed isn't really needed. So this is basically actually 83 gear score in terms of necessary substats for Boss Arunka, and same here, this effectiveness, this 9 effectiveness is useless. So this might as well be also 83 gear score. Same with this chest, this 4 speed, it should be FRES ideally. So this might as well be -8, so that is 85 gear score. Yeah. And this is actually a good time for us to talk about one more thing with misleading equipment score on pieces of gear. There are some pieces of gear where you actually have less than 4 substats you want to roll into, and this will leave you with at least one substat that you just don't care about at all. The most common example is going to be DPS chests, I think. Like here, this piece of gear here, we have 94 equipment score, we've got crit damage, crit chance, and 4 speed with HP. This HP we do not care about. Like, this could be literally anything, this could have no line here, and I wouldn't care. So then, when we look at equipment score, we don't really need to factor this in. Like, for example, here we have another chest, also 94 equipment score, and this has 7 HP instead of 5. So which piece is better? It's technically this one, right? Because this is the same equipment score, but 2 of its stats are into a useless substat that we don't care about. So if I'm looking at just DPS stats, then this chest is better despite being the same score. This is just 2 score better technically. And we can also look at this one. This one has 9 HP here. It's only 1 score higher though. So if we just subtract 5, this is 89. If we subtract 9, this is 86. So this is still better than this one, despite being at a lower equipment score in terms of just being a pure DPS chest. Now let's get into when we actually want to hit flat stats. First example would be Protection Set Knights. These units typically want a ton of HP with some defense, and some units also want speed as well. If you are chasing equipment score on these units, you are not going to have a good time. Like here we can have an example that only wants defense and HP. We don't care about speed, don't care about F, don't care about FRES. Your optimal substats on your gear is going to be HP% plus flat HP on your sword, HP%, defense%, and flat defense on the helm, HP%, defense%, and flat HP on the chest, defense%, flat defense, flat HP, defense%, flat defense, flat HP, defense%, flat HP, and this one's missing flat defense, but you would want flat defense here on all of your right sides. So then on our sword, we have exactly 2 lines we're trying to hit. Ideally 1, but if we hit flat HP, it's whatever, because have fun trying to penta-roll HP% every single time. And then on every other piece, there's only 3 lines to hit. So we are going to have at least 1 flat stat on every single piece. All of our left sides have 1 flat. All of our right sides will have 2. And also, this is the thing that I just talked about, where we have completely dead lines. We do not care about some of these lines on these pieces at all. Like on this helmet, 2 speed, don't care. 8 speed, don't care. Here, attack %, don't care. Here, F, don't care. And this actually has 2, this is missing a flat defense roll, but like we don't care about this. And the sword will also have 2 that we don't care about, the F and the HP. Of course, some units, maybe they'll have like some usable debuffs. It would be nice to have effectiveness on your 4th line, but it's not really a priority. So then, the gear score on your Protection Set Knights are always, or the equipment score is always going to look like complete trash because you have so many flats. Have fun trying to dodge flats on every single piece. You're going to hit your flats, but it doesn't matter because if you can make your knight tanky, then it's fine. And also, Protection Set Knights want a ton of HP because you have Arius with all the damage share, you're going to be taking a lot of damage and you want more HP to soak that damage, plus it makes your starting barrier from Protection Set a little bit bigger. Aside from just penta-rolling HP on every single left side, the only other way to increase your HP is to hit flat HP on your right sides. So you can see here, this has, I think, 3 rolls into flat HP, and this has 4 rolls into flat HP. Really low score on all of these pieces. This helmet's actually not bad, but it's just low score on all of the pieces, and we've got a bunch of flat HP rolls, but you look at the final stat line, 2k defense, 33k HP. it's fine. She's bulky and she does her job, so it doesn't really matter. Note that this really only applies to, for this specific thing, where you're only looking at HP and defense, is really only going to apply to protection set knights. If you are on speed set, then you're going to want speed, so you're going to have more lines to roll into. So stuff like protection, immunity, and also to an extent HP sets, you might want to keep in mind that it's fine to hit flat HP on these types of gear. This can also apply to DPS gear, though it's a bit more niche. Crit chance and crit D have caps of 100% and 350%. If you are using a destruction set, it can be pretty easy to hit the caps. So like here's an example of a DPS with a bunch of flat attack on its right sides. This ring has a 259 flat attack, and this boot has 192 flat attack. But the thing is we're already at the crit chance cap, and we're pretty close to the crit damage cap. If this was more rolls of the crit chance and crit damage, it wouldn't really be that useful. Of course, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have any flat attack rolls at all. If we look at this helmet, for example, there's 5 rolls here that didn't hit HP percent. Let's move all 5 of these rolls into attack percent. And here on the necklace, there's some rolls that didn't hit attack percent. If we move those into attack percent, suddenly we're missing a bunch of speed, crit chance, and crit damage, and we could move all of these flat attack rolls into speed, crit chance, and crit damage, and that would be a much better looking Modwig with higher stats. But in a perfect world, that is the only way you're going to have that. In reality, you're not going to just be able to perfectly align your rolls. You're not going to just penta attack percent roll on all of the pieces of gear and then just dodge flat HP or flat attack and perfectly align all your substats and whatnot. You're just going to have to use the gear that you have. And in this situation where we have these as our pieces of gear, if we're slotting in a ring here, this is pretty much the best possible ring that we could have. You could change one flat attack roll for one crit damage roll or whatever. You would still have a decent amount of flat attack though, especially because you're not only gearing one unit. Even if you did have that perfect set of gear, you're going to need much more than one perfect set of gear because you have to have a lot of units geared, not just one. There's also a couple of units with really unique gear that is also really, really hard to get, which I'll go over very quickly. One is Amiki. This unit wants attack, F-res. That's it. A bit of HP and defense is nice, but it's not really the priority. The individual pieces of my Amiki are pretty horrifying. The sword is pretty good. The rest is just like, this is what, 2 rolls into F-res, 2 rolls into speed, 1 roll flat attack. This is F-res, F, flat attack, flat defense. This is defense, flat attack, F-res, HP. This is all really low gear score, except for the sword, of course, with a bunch of rolls into flat stats, or just stats that we don't care about at all. Like this speed is actively detrimental, if anything. And then we don't care about this effectiveness. The bulk, we don't really, I'd much rather have this hit flat attack or F-res. And if I'm trying to increase her attack, the only way for me to do it is to either penta roll attack on my left sides or hit flat attack on my right sides, which is what I ended up doing. So this gear is pretty horrifying, but it gets the job done. Sure, I'd like her to have higher F-res, but her gear is so annoyingly hard to get. And the F-res of 5, or the end result of 5.6k attack with 114 F-res is good enough for me. I'd much rather just settle for this rather than waste my resources chasing anything better, because it's really hard to get, and there's no one else using this gear, so you'd be chasing gear exclusively for her. Like, I could penta roll F-res or something on my chest. There's also Requiem Roana, who has 2 builds actually. She either only wants attack, or she wants a bunch of effectiveness with a bit of attack. Ideally, you'd be triple torrent or triple hit, depending on if you're going full damage or full F. If you are going full damage, then sure, penta roll all of your attack percents on your left sides. Your chest doesn't matter at all because you can't get attack percent on that, but then the only way to get more attack would be to get flat attack on your right sides. And then on your effectiveness build, you'd just be chasing effectiveness on every single piece without really caring what the other substats are, though attack would be appreciated. And here, I only have 1 hit set. I'm missing out on 40 effectiveness from not having 2 more hit sets, though this is my highest effectiveness gear, at least that I'm willing to spare. And I would be losing effectiveness if I tried to force hit set. And also, this garbage here gets the job done, so I will not be wasting my time rolling hit set gear just for a marginal upgrade when this already gets the job done. And you can also see, like, this isn't even that much effectiveness in some of these pieces. It's just, like, it's good enough, and there's no point in looking at her equipment score or whatever. It's just, she has 261 effectiveness, which is good enough for my usage. So now let's talk about why this equipment score slider for simple selection is really, really bad to use. This mostly has to do with the tankier situation that we were talking about. Because flat stats will decrease our overall equipment score, the base score on your tank gear is always going to look really bad as well. So let's look at this boot here. We can go HP set, HP main with defense and flat HP. So cancel this here. This boot here, we can still see its base score. It's only 24, but if we look at the actual substats, HP percent main on HP set with defense, F, flat defense, and flat HP, this is rollable, which I did, and I ended up with a pretty decent piece. 94 is pretty high, considering that we have 2 flat stats here. Ideally, I would have dodged effectiveness, but it is what it is. This is still a really good piece that I'm pretty happy with, but if you were using the equipment score slider, this piece would have been tossed out. And any piece like this would be tossed out. Like, let's look at the perfect boot from earlier. This is 29. The equipment score is very high at the start, but let's just say that we decrease the starting base stats a little bit. Let's say this A defense is 6, and let's say this A HP is also 6. This would give it a base score of 25, and it would get tossed out by the equipment score slider. But 6, 6, 2 flat stats, you would still always roll this piece. If we assume that it rolled the exact same way as mine did, it would be 4 score lower. You would have 92 equipment score, which is still really, really good, because with the flat stat tax, it'd be equivalent to a 99 equipment score piece in terms of roll quality. This is really just to say that when you are looking at your pieces of gear, you should just look over them real quick. Like, look for these niche substat combos, and some of these aren't even niche. Like, tanks that want only defense and HP is pretty common. Protection set night gear is relatively common. Don't use the simple sort slider, because how are you going to get any sort of gear for these units unless they're like top percent? You're basically aiming for like 100 equipment score gear, and you would never be able to get any sort of gear that is already more than usable. It would take you forever to get any sort of usable gear if you try to sort your gear like this. There's a couple more reasons why equipment score is misleading. This is me talking about the thing I said earlier, where I said the entire equipment score calculation method is flawed from the start. Equipment score is an adapted version of gear score, which was a community metric used for evaluating gear in Fribbles. However, gear score was made before Reforging existed, and it was never really updated afterwards. The intent of gear score was to normalize rolls, so you could tell how high rolled something was pretty easily. Like, attack percent is 8%, crit chance is 5%, so if we do crit chance is worth 1.6, attack is worth 1, then both are worth 8 at a max roll. Crit damage, same thing, 7% to 8%, so this is times 1.14, and then speed, we ignore 5 speed because the odds are so low, but 4 times 2 would also make it 8, and this would effectively normalize the rolls. Reforging is where it starts getting weird though. Like, for example, crit chance gives you 1% each time you roll into it. Crit damage also gives you 1% each time you roll into it, though at 4 it does jump by 1, but we'll just look at this section for now. If crit chance is worth 1.6 and crit damage is worth 1.14, and they both only increase by 1 on Reforged, that means that rolling into crit chance is inherently more valuable than rolling into crit damage. And then speed is the worst version of this, because you don't get anything for a base roll, so it's plus 0, but then after that, you get plus 2 each time you roll into it. So this is even higher than crit chance. Crit chance is plus 1.6, this is plus 2. Also, attack percent gets this jump here from base to 1 roll. So if you roll into like attack, defense, HP, F, or F-res, it's suddenly an extra 1 score. So this was never really fixed after Reforging came out, and equipment score just adapted it. So the very calculation method for equipment score is already a little bit flawed. Also, for some strange reason, equipment score also factors in the main stat as well, which is why equipment score is gear score plus 25 or 26. The or is the funny part. This typically only applies to level 88 swords and level 88 helmets. The level 88 sword you see here has 515 flat attack, and while a 90 sword has 525 flat attack, a difference of 10. This difference of 10 flat attack would typically be worth less than 0.1 if it was a substat, but as a main stat, it is worth a little bit over 0.5. Helmets have a similar issue. Let's make our way down to 88 helmets. Down here, 90 helmets have 2835, 88 is 2765, a difference of 70 flat HP, and again, this is going to be a little bit over 0.5 difference. Also, we should note that equipment score is always rounded down, so this 0.5 difference is often going to lead to a full drop of 1 score. Completely bizarre that it works like this, but this is why sometimes you'll have the equipment score on level 88 swords or helmets be 1 less than they should be. So that is it for the video. It's kind of complicated, I know, but hopefully you guys were able to learn something from this. The general idea is just the equipment score is not the end be all. It tells you a little bit about how well it rolled, but because sometimes some substats are just worth more than other ones, and also the whole thing with flat stats, you're not always going to get a full picture of how good a piece of gear is just from seeing its equipment score. And also because of flat stats, simple sorting, complete garbage. It's just really bad advice to tell anybody to use simple sorting if they are actually interested in getting good gear. It doesn't matter that there is an option here that says exclude equipment with speed substat, because like I showed you, there are some very good pieces of tank gear that can be hidden with low equipment score. So that is it for this video, and I will see you guys next time.